Clear prop.
Star 73 is Yankee number 2 following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear Pleasantville. 1 Charlie Bravo, exit in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
I'm fantastic. Last week I thought was an amazing sit-down conversation with Paul Craig, the author of The Killing Zone. We've had this on our show list for a long time. What better time to do it than to talk about decision-making?
Really nice to get to know Paul a little bit. You know, when you read the book, you look at this and you, or at least I do, and I think this is some academically gifted type person, which he is, but at the end of the day, he's just a pilot, just like you and I. And it was really nice to be able to actually get to know him a little bit. And here's his, the reason for writing the book.
Well, you probably saw it if you follow us on social media at all, but Paul was sitting and looked like in his study wearing a Behind the Prop hat, which was a pretty cool little gift to see him wearing that. When we came on the Zoom call, Wally and I were both holding up a copy of The Killing Zone, acting as though we were reading it. But the one thing that I think I took away from the book, and I think that I took away from the conversation, is that it really is all about decision making. And like he said, and like I guess I've thought in the past, but it's been hard to articulate, is we don't know all the times that really good decisions were made. We don't hear those stories. Unfortunately, right. We hear about the stories where multiple decisions were made that ended up creating that decision chain that caused problems for someone. And no one, unfortunately, is free from making these bad decisions.
Right.
I can honestly say that I struggled with a recent dispatch that hindsight says I shouldn't have done it, right? And I still let a student pilot go on a cross country. Everything was legal. We could have this conversation all day that everything looked good. There was something that didn't feel right, and it was a little bit of external pressure, both for him and for me, that I think ultimately led to a bad decision. There was no result that happened that we're going to hear about, so no one will ever know that unless I fess up to the fact that, hey, some of this external pressure got me to make a bad decision. And that's what we want to talk about today.
Yeah. Fortunately for all of us, there are enough safety measures built into aviation to where, by and large, for something bad to happen, multiple things have to go wrong. Usually there are backups within the system itself. But, the one thing that I try to impart on applicants when we finish a check ride is that smart people make bad decisions. I make them. We all make them. And when we the one thing that we have to study is we have accidents, and we can look at accident reports, and it's real easy to sometimes look at what happened in a situation and say, oh, well, I would have never done that because this is the way I do it. Well, I think when you have that attitude, you're in trouble, because I think we all can do it. And I'm usually, if I get that feeling from someone, I can usually, in a scenario, convince them that maybe they would try to push the envelope a little bit. And the one thing in our training, and Paul talked about this last week on the podcast, one thing in our training typically that we don't have is we don't have external pressures. Sure, we want to get the flight done, but if we don't get the flight done, that's okay. We still go home and have dinner with our family. But in the real world, a lot of times flights are because you're taking somebody from point A to point B for whatever event, a family reunion Paul kept referring to last week. You do factor that in. Geez, should I turn around and go back? Or, gee, if I turn back, I won't get to attend the family reunion. And so that's something that we don't, in our typical flight training syllabus rides, we can't really build that into it. So I think that's something that as flight instructors, we should make people think about. Say, okay, we're going to go on this cross country, and the reason we're going to the airport of first intended landing is to go to, Uncle Bob's funeral, and factor that into it. Okay, the weather is maybe not perfect. Well, do we continue to go to make it to the funeral, or do we turn back?
And that's probably not something they're going to postpone. So you're making a decision to either make a significant event or miss a significant event. One we've talked about offline before that would, I think, create a tremendous amount of external pressures is if I was going to propose to my wife and I had paid a photographer and they were, let's call it Brenham from here, right? It's a 30-minute flight, but I have to make the decision on, am I going to make that? That's probably a really big deal.
Right.
And something that I might push the envelope for. I might scud run. I might skirt some clouds. I don't know what I would do, but that's a pressure that I don't think we get to feel. But if you're a pilot 75 hours in and decide to make that trip, that's going to be a hard decision.
Right. And it sounds like what we're trying to do is convince people to always make the absolute most conservative decision. And that's really not what we're trying to do, because we are trying to accomplish a mission by flying this airplane from one place to another. One thing I will talk about on check rides is weight and balance scenarios, where I give the applicant a scenario where they're 20 pounds overweight. And by and large, I would say 80% of the applicants say, well, we can't go. And, I say, well, is there anything we can to make us go? And they say, well, we can take off that you've got a 40-pound bag. We can take 20 pounds out of your 40-pound bag, and you can just bring 20 pounds. And I go, well, but what I have in my bag is really important. I really need to take that to where we're going. Is there anything else we could do? Well, they're landing at the destination with maybe 3.5 hours worth of fuel. Maybe they're landing with, say, 35 gallons worth of fuel. And I say, well, geez, could we take off 3.5 gallons and land with 31.5 gallons worth of fuel? We're still landing with more than 3 hours of fuel. And that's usually way down their list of, well, I'm comfortable with landing with just a little over 3 hours worth of fuel rather than 3.5 hours worth of fuel.
And my philosophy on that one, and I could be wrong, and I'd love to hear what y'all think that are listening, but I think sometimes that fuel coming out is way down the list is because a lot of people haven't ever taken fuel out of a plane.
Right.
They don't know how to take fuel out of a plane. And if they don't work or go to a flight school that maybe has some full service support and can ask for someone to take fuel out for them, they don't know how to do that. But they are becoming pilots, single engine land pilots in most cases. They can fly anybody's plane. What are they going to do? What are you going to do if you're listening right now if you had that same dilemma and needed to take out fuel and never had taken out fuel before?
Yeah.
It's a real scenario to have your CFI while you're flight training teach you how to take fuel out. It might not be that sexy that we're doing a day where we're talking about fuel and putting fuel in and taking fuel out. But those are things that as pilots we have to do.
Yeah.
I heard a corporate pilot recently say, I don't mind going and shopping for Cokes and buying bags of ice. Pilots do all kinds of things as it relates to the operations of an aircraft.
Yeah. I had a check ride with a young man a couple weeks ago, and one of his endorsements wasn't quite right, and his CFI was out of town. And I said to him, I said, well, what are we going to do? And he started to pack up his bags and walk out of the room. And I said, well, wait a minute. I said, let's try to use some problem-solving techniques here. Is there anything we can do to get that endorsement from your CFI? I mean, can we make a phone call? Can we get an email? Can we do something? And after a while he went, well, yeah, I guess I could do that. And I wanted him to be a little bit more proactive and try to problem solve, try to figure out how we can complete this mission. One scenario that I'll pose to our listeners is, let's say we're going on a 200-mile cross-country flight, and let's just say we're in a basically a 100-knot airplane, so about a 2-hour flight. And weather is absolutely not a factor today. Weather is fine. The winds are fine. There's unlimited ceiling and visibility. And about halfway into our flight, we determine that our number one communication radio is not working. Now, we have a number 2 comm, and it's working just fine. What are you going to do? And the choices are A, continue. B, turn around and go back to your airport that you took off from. C, divert to an airport that's 10 miles away. And D is to make an off-airport landing.
Real quick, if you're thinking about D, do not come and rent from my flight school.
D is wrong. D is wrong. A, B, and C are all maybes. But
which one's the right one, Wally?
Well, it just depends. It just depends. But I would say if I pose this on check rides, the majority of people say they're going to divert, and I said, well, why are we going to divert? Why? And the most common answer I get, well, what if that other radio fails? Well, yeah, that is a possibility, but it's also a possibility that I might be in a car accident on the way home today, but that's not going to keep me from going home. There is a certain level of risk that we take when we strap that airplane to our back and take it in the air. If someone says, well, I'm probably going to divert because maybe the problem is bigger than just a radio failure. Maybe I've got an electrical problem. I go, well, that's great thinking. Okay, I can live with that. But it's just something to think about. When I interact with the pilot, they're usually in super conservative mode, and they think that's what I want to hear is, oh boy, I'm gonna put the airplane on the ground and figure out what's wrong with it. Where maybe the airport that you're diverting to, you haven't checked the NOTAMs. Maybe at 400 feet, you look down, there's big X's on the runway. So maybe it's a closed airport. So maybe the safest course of action would have been to continue on to your destination.
Well, and I think we all have cell phones nowadays. There are procedures we learned that if we did lose both radios, what are we going to do? I don't know that becomes necessarily an unsafe situation.
Right.
But it becomes a stressful situation.
Yeah.
What role? You're on this testing side, so sometimes I do compartmentalize you in that bucket, but you're also a CFI. What role do you think CFIs play in teaching the decision-making process?
It's a huge role. It's a huge role, and I think the CFIs have to give the student the liberty to make a decision, and they have to, to an extent, be able to let the student play out that decision. In other words, if we're flying from airport A to airport B, and we give them a situation where you want them to divert, and you want them to go to airport C, but the student instead chooses to go to airport D, I think you need to let them go to airport D. And, if airport D was a poor decision, that's the slippery slope. Whereas as the CFI, you've got to say, hey, it's there's a lot better reasons to go to airport C, but I think letting them go to airport D teaches them a lot more. My oldest daughter, I was not her recommending instructor when she got her private pilot certificate, but we flew together quite a bit. And I asked her about her different flight instructors, what she got from the different flight instructors that she had. And she had several different flight instructors, just to sort of strange circumstances. while she was working on her private pilot. But she mentioned that one thing about flying with me, she said, you let me make mistakes. And she said, so I learned a couple of things with you. She says, I learned not to make the mistake, but I learned if I did make the mistake, how to get out of it.
Right. I think that's what makes me so worried about myself becoming a CFI is I won't want those people to make those mistakes, right? I will want to fix. I'm a fixer. But I do know that I have flown with CFIs that were extremely calm and resilient in their teaching and would let me make those mistakes, right? Never to get anywhere near a safety concern for either us or the aircraft, but they would let me make mistakes. And obviously, like she said, I learned most from those situations.
Right.
What we've talked about it. I think we've mentioned it on the show, but really and truly, I don't think I became a pilot until I came to the flight school and said, we're going to fly or not fly, right? And that was somewhere in the instrument time frame, early commercial days. No matter what the clouds were, no matter what the winds were, I felt like I was making that decision before I got here. And I never really felt like I was the pilot, a really good pilot, as I came to the flight school and would be excited about being here and ask my instructor to fly. I think it becomes important for students to have those opportunities as early as possible. Meaning, I get my private pilot's license. The student, which is now a private pilot, their certificate is real. What do they need to do? They need to go fly. They need to experience some decisions.
Yeah, after a student pilot gets their private pilot certificate, after we've shaken hands and done all the pictures and everything, I will usually sit down with the pilot and I'll say, what now? And at least around here where I do most of my check rides, so many of them say, I'm starting my instrument training tomorrow. And I cringe a little bit because I feel like they just need to get out and fly. Once you learn how to ride that bicycle without the training wheels, you need to go out and ride it. And pretty soon, when you get a little confident in it, you're riding with no hands and you're doing wheelies. You're doing all the things that as parents we cringe at seeing kids do that, but that's part of life. I think that you just need to get out and you need to create mission-oriented scenarios yourself, and it's not like you really have to dig into a book to figure this out. It may be as simple as the $100 hamburger flying up, the place that's 60 miles away with your two buddies and going up there for lunch. Is it mission-oriented? Yeah, it is. You're hungry. You want to go have lunch. You want to complete the flight, but you have the ability to make the decision. And boy, the wind is 12 gusting to 18, and it's a direct crosswind. Maybe that's not the best thing to do today. But maybe it's within your capability. I don't know, but that's your decision to make.
I remember a scenario that again, I don't think people believe it until they have to experience it. I said over and over, I would never let external pressures bother me, Wally. I'm sure we've all heard students say that, not me, it won't get me. But I had a pretty good friend of mine that I worked with that wanted to take his wife to dinner in Galveston. He had aspirations of being a pilot. I was a newly minted pilot. And we were going to go. We picked the day way in advance. We were, I think, in the springtime of year, if my memory serves me correctly. And here I get up that day. Ceilings are about 1,800 feet. And to get to Galveston from where we sit today, you probably never really fly above 2,500 feet. And then you probably only get to 2,500 for a short period of time. But I couldn't get above 18. So would I go? I mean, I probably couldn't get above 13 if it was 18. So I called the guy and said, "Hey, man, the weather's not looking good. I don't think we're going to go." And he was like, "Oh, man, come on. I really want to take her. It's a special night. I got to get down there." And I was thinking, that's weird. I'm kind of shocked that he actually pushed back on me a little bit, but he's not a pilot. I'm the pilot. I said, okay, I'll watch it. So immediately I talk myself out of it and say, we'll give it a few more minutes. Every bad thing comes from multiple decisions that are bad.
Right.
So gets to be about 1 o'clock. He sends me a text. I said, well, they're up to 2,100. So we're looking better. Let's make a go, no go decision at 3 o'clock when that ATIS was coming out, because they were going to drive about an hour to get to here. Then we were going to take off, get to dinner around 6:30, fly back at night in the dark. So time goes by and 3 o'clock comes and the ATIS comes out and it's 2,600 feet. And I was like, I'd made my decision. I'm telling everyone out there, I made my decision. 3,000 was my go, no go. What do you think I did when I heard 2,600 feet?
Oh, you probably said, I think let's wait till 4.
Let's wait till 4. So
Yeah.
I waited till 4.
Yeah.
So I told him, look, you're risking it, but I think it's improving. Forecast says it's going to continue to improve. If it's above 3 at 4 p.m., we'll go. So he says, all right, I'm coming. I'm sure, now all of a sudden he's an expert weatherman. He's like, I'm sure they're going to lift. We're going to be fine. I know we'll be good. And I'm like, how does he know that? So 4 o'clock ATIS comes around, 3,200 feet. We make the decision to go. And we go. And we went to Galveston. They had a great dinner. We flew home. Again, another story where you don't hear about the bad decisions that were made. But in reality, I was nowhere near as informed about weather as I am today. I was taking a very small snapshot of time into account, and the fact that the trend was improving. What normally happens at night? Near water.
Right.
Like everywhere
Yeah.
we were going
Yeah.
was water.
Yeah.
And here I am making a decision in the springtime about this is going to lift and stay lifted while we're going to fly back at night in the dark.
Right.
Could have been so much worse, but it is those external pressures, the small people that are trying to influence you to make a decision, and it slowly builds, which brings up to me personal minimums. I don't think back then I really had a hard, fast rule. I don't think I had a limit on clouds, crosswinds, fuel. I don't think I had all that stuff. But today, I think because of all the missions I've flown with my family and had to take fuel out of planes, had to put baggage in, had to take fuel out, had to leave a kid home one time to get the mission accomplished in an aircraft. I've had to drive to Austin more times than not because that was the safe way to get the mission accomplished. Personal minimums became a really big deal for me. And I think it was partially me to make my wife feel confident. But if you don't have personal minimums written down that you can turn to, if you don't know really what crosswinds you're capable of landing in on a regular basis and stay proficient at that level, not because you got away with it once at 18, are you now always going to be proficient at 18, right? You got to keep those personal minimums up. You got to keep if you're instrument rated, your instrument proficiency and currency up. More proficiency than currency here, people. It's all about decision making, no question.
Yeah, and for a student pilot, although you do have some solo flights, by and large, your instructor is right there. Before you do a solo cross country, the instructor has to endorse you for it, and obviously if they're doing their job correctly, which most of them are, I believe, they're going over the weather with you, and they're looking at forecasts and all that kind of stuff. And the person who jumps right into their instrument training the day after their private pilot check ride, they're going to have an instructor with them most of the time when they're doing the instrument training. So I just feel like you really, truly are not making that decision on your own. And it is a skill set that can be developed and needs to be, you need to work on it. You need to work on making those decisions. I know I used to ask my girls when they would come back from flying, I remember being scared in an airplane myself as a student pilot, and the pulse going up and coming in and landing and realizing, oh gee, that was a little bit scary. I used to ask my daughters all the time when they'd come in from flying, I said, have you scared yourself in an airplane yet? And for the longest time, they would just look at me and they'd say, no. But finally, some things happened with both of them, and they said, "Oh, gee, Dad, I was scared. This happened, and this is what I did, and this is how it worked out." And I mean, we discussed it, but it did my heart well to hear that they had been scared in an airplane, because everybody will at some point.
No doubt, and I've had that experience, and I think each one of those scary moments probably make you a better pilot, and they're hopefully not the ones we ever hear about. As we talked about doing missions and getting that experience on those, when you take a student for a private pilot check ride, Wally, what do you think? And I know you don't know this right off. What do you think the number of airports a private pilot student has visited really is, on average?
I would guess 5 to 7 airports.
Yeah. And out of those, we'll say 50-50 controlled, not controlled, probably something like that.
Yeah, that's probably accurate.
That's not very much experience.
No.
And as Paul said last week, his first sign-off, he was thrilled. And he asked the same question you asked about what now. And they said, well, I'm taking my family to Disneyland, Disney World. And if you read the book or listen to the book, they had prepaid hotels, non-refundable, prepaid tickets, non-refundable. Lots of pressure to get to Disney World with your family. Can you imagine that being your first cross-country flight?
Yeah.
Can you imagine the pressure of that, right? I mean, you need to see other airports. You need those $100 hamburger missions. You need to try those things. The last thing that I have on my list that I want to talk about that my instructors did me right, very right, is real instrument conditions. When I was lucky enough to take my check ride with you, Wally, I believe I had somewhere to the tune of about 8 hours of actual instrument flight time in the soup, moisture on the windshield, as I used to call it, before I took my instrument check ride. Similar to the private airports, what do you think the average is, or what are you normally reflecting on as you're doing that logbook audit for instrument? How much actual time is in those logbooks?
This is very informal. This is not. There's no written data to back this up at all. But I would say the average instrument applicant may have 48 hours of instrument time, and I would say the average is probably less than an hour of actual. And I would say a good 40 to 50% of the applicants have 0 actual time.
Wow.
And it is a little bit of a head scratcher where you think, geez, I'm going to issue you a certificate that's going to say instrument rating on it. You're illegal to go fly in the clouds, and you've never done it.
Yep. And instructors too. I mean, there are some instructors that I don't think had a lot of instrument time when they got out of their CFI training and earned their double I. I've heard some horror stories, but I mean, if you get the opportunity, whether you're a private student or an instrument student, and it's a 1,500 foot day, calm winds, and a 1,000-foot deck above your airport, find a double I that has some experience and has the confidence to go fly, and they're proficient, and go shoot some approaches. You're going to come out of the bottoms with 800 feet to spare before minimums, for sure. There's no better day to do that than on a calm day. And most, if you are ready for your check ride, most calm days have a little bit of cloud cover because the wind's not blowing it out if the moisture's just right. So go shoot some approaches in actual. You'll be a much better pilot for it. And when it does come to be the first time you're in the cockpit alone, you're not going to feel the anxiety and stress that you might have felt had it been the first time you ever flew actual and you're all alone.
Right.
That makes for tough decisions.
Absolutely.
Well, we haven't done the research and all the work that Paul Craig has done, but we've seen a lot together and separately, and we hope we help you make some decisions that turn out on the right side of good for you. As always, thanks for listening, and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.